Stephen Robinson of the Play Typer Guide podcast, and we're about to jump into part 2 of my discussion with Steward Beckham and Evan Stern. I was hoping you could actually help me understand this because you're smarter than I, and it's cool because if you look at this at 2024 with Liz Cheney, and there are people who spoke. I made this point on social media. Who we had Stephanie Grisham, who lied for Trump, speaking at the convention. But Ruah Roman, who I've interviewed, a Palestinian speaker, there was no room for her to speak at the convention, because again, that reaching out to Republicans, get them to vote, but with with essentially all that Cheney could say was that Trump is bad, or that I slightly agree more on foreign policy with her than on Trump, but in ways that Vance very cannily spun as more wars. That's what they have in common. It was an endorsement without any meaning. So RFK, I felt, was more damning. I live in Portland. I knew a lot of I've written about how Phoebe from Friends would be an RFK MAGA person now because she didn't believe in evolution and 100%. Didn't believe in all the stuff. There was a lot of that. There's no fluoride in the water here. I was writing about this before this happened, and I was seeing even with COVID, there's a large contingent. There's a large coalition of people who MAGA could grab of this sort of don't trust science, don't whatever. And so RFK, I was concerned. It was because that's a coalition. Those are people who I have voted Democratic in the past. If they're voting for Trump, if he grabs that sort of kook coalition, that's another part of our stool that's gone. Okay, well, what is Cheney giving us? And Absolutely. We didn't as much as I don't like Tulsi Gabbard. I don't like RFK. I could go if those are gets, because they're going to go and say, I support this guy. Trump is going to advance whatever you think why you agree with me and what I advance, they're going to help advance. And what could Cheney tell anyone what limited support she did have? She just lost her own primary, but Trump is bad. Well, that's been litigated. We all know Trump is bad, or the idea that, so the 2020 campaign being about Trump being this existential threat. And I still see this from diehard Harris and Archer, Hillary Clinton supporters about how that should have been obvious. It's well, okay, I don't disagree with you, but it was kind of clear.
Yeah.
With Biden's approval and Trump ahead of Biden in polls consistently, despite being, literally on trial. I want to, go back to 2024. This guy's he's in a courtroom. Brother's in a courtroom. Dude is in a courtroom and is beating the incumbent president in the polling. I think that means you throw out the book and every other book and figure out how to, what the hell is going on.
Is it a rhetorical question, or do you want me to answer it? Because I've got a good answer for you.
Please do.
So these people can't wrap their heads around Hasan Piker being extraordinarily successful beyond the fact that he is conventionally good looking, pretty well ripped, and live streams for 8 hours a day, 8 days a week. All of those things matter, but what none of these people seem to be able to reconcile is that Hasan Piker is actually brilliant. People should listen to Hasan Piker if they want to learn. He does the work. He shows his work in real time. He actually demonstrates his own process of growth and understanding. And his political analysis is really fucking sharp. He's really fucking savvy. So if the only Hasan Piker content you watch is him watching the conversation between Miller and Longwell, you will learn a lot. And one thing that he says in that analysis of their debate, of their argument, is the role that Islamophobia plays as a environmental context that leads people to embrace these analyses. The role that Islamophobia, that anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-Palestinian bigotry is so normalized in our culture and in our politics that people aren't even aware of it, that their entire worldview is built upon that as an unexamined norm. When we look at the absurd self-defeating choice to bring people like Stephanie Grisham on stage at the DNC, but refused to have Roman, a Palestinian speaker who had proudly endorsed Harris, right? Somebody who's an elected official within the Democratic Party, to refuse to allow anybody to speak and even represent Palestinian humanity on stage at the DNC. The simple answer is there is so much widespread anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-Palestinian bias, which is separate but related, within the mainstream of the Democratic Party, that they were so afraid of their own shadow around accusations of anti-Semitism, because they had, over the course of decades, and of course 9/11 makes this worse, but 9/11 builds on pre-existing dynamics, that they really thought it was going to hurt them more than it helped them.
Yeah, I mean, and it's it's like almost a sketch, or again a West Wing episode of watching this unfold, where from Mona Charen and then Charlie Sykes and Sarah Longwell, listing of all the terrible things Piker did, and one of them being saying America deserved 9/11. That's slightly out of context. Even if in the context I don't entirely agree, but it's a debate worth having. But then Alyssa Slotkin appeared on Bill Maher's show the same day. Like, again, to quote, Kathy Bates from Misery, do we all have amnesia? He lost his show because he said that the terrorists were not cowards. They were courageous because they were willing to die for their cause. He lost his show for this. And he's had a list of course, anti-Muslim things, so maybe that doesn't matter. But anti-trans, we have a trans representative. We have trans people in our coalition. He's been anti-trans. He said a lot of stuff. But that is still worthwhile to appear on his show. John Fetterman can appear with Mark Levin. This is just not serious. It winds up being the rule, and so you just wind up sounding ridiculous. And so Slotkins makes herself sound ridiculous. Even now, she then is now back in the corner of being well, I wouldn't go on his show because he says mean things about me. And why would I go on the show of okay, well, wait a minute. Why you guys go on Fox News?
All the time.
Do you not watch Fox News? You should check out Fox News before you go on it again. And they make fun, they attack you guys all the time, and you go on there. So it's just sort of this quicksand of they have no argument. They just look just ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think that is a factor of being, as Irving Kristol, as Evan loves to remind me, famously said, that he was a liberal being mugged by reality, or a radical liberal being mugged by reality. I think there's an entire generation of political prognosticators being mugged by reality right now. And a statistic that I always think about is that the same number of white voters who voted for Ronald Reagan in his 1984 reelect landslide also voted for Mitt Romney in 2012. Mm-hmm. But Barack Obama still won because America of 1984 looks a lot different than America of 2012. There's a lot more people of color. There's a lot more younger people. There's a lot more progressive white people. There's a lot of basically just differences in that world. But the Democrats are still operating off a political playbook, whether they consciously do it or subconsciously do it, that basically says the median white voter in America that does not follow politics, that might inhabit spaces that allow them to succumb to some sorry stereotypes about the other in the country, is who we need to cater to the most, and everybody else is secondary. And so that decision to not have a Palestinian speaker at the DNC, or the decision to sane-wash Fox News, to go on Fox News right after you have somebody like Victor Davis Hanson come on and say that, they're all a bunch of race baiters and they have dirty cities, and, that they're not helping the clean Americans or whatever, stuff that is very close to Nazi rhetoric. And then you'll have someone like a Josh Gottheimer come on right after him and basically all but agree that the Democrats have a far left problem on Jesse Waters' late night show or something like that, and so it's just they feel that they need to cater to a specific type of voter that has been proven over and over again to not be as important as other kinds of voters in the American electorate. But it's not for me to say. The reason why they do that, I still really don't know. Again, there probably is a lot of latent prejudice in that. There might be some donor driven incentives to that. There is a lot there, but it doesn't help the Democratic Party. And it also makes one ask the question, just like the Republicans were during the New Deal, the post-Depression to late Vietnam era, are they just okay with being a controlled minority where they win sometimes, they lose most of the time, but they, are not really trying to reimagine the policy or political landscape because the decision has already been decided that we're going to both try and have, in the case of the Cold War, both guns and butter by beefing up the social safety net and the military budget and get surprised when inflation happens, but only blame the social safety net and not the military for the inflation. So we're living in a time now where the consensus is allow industries to deregulate, support tax cuts no matter what they do to tax bases around the country who are watching their infrastructure and their social services decline, and also play to a nationalistic or even fear-mongered identity of America. And that center is where the conversation is, and the Democrats are okay with playing in that center of the conversation instead of being like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or Zoran Mondani or even Ro Khanna on his best days, when you're trying to reimagine a political conversation that is not just sitting inside GOP frames and very carefully worded Frank Luntz inspired understandings of different policy positions, like being pro-life or the death tax or whatever else kind of like buzzwords you want to use to talk about common sense policy but add a negative connotation to it. So it's, again, that is probably what is happening to an entire generation of democratic prognosticators and democratic leadership. And the Bulwark is a creature of that former world and was brought into the Democratic tent by bringing in those tools from the old world, but it's not really helping the Democratic tent because those tools also demand them to marginalize and stigmatize the people who want to imagine a better political future.
And it's very true. I think it is bizarre because we'll hear Shapiro and Slotkin both talk about we need to get shit done, Democrats, and do this. And that's the same two problems of like, well, that was Biden. That was about like, that's what Democrats do. That's how they run. Like, have they not run on that? And Republicans then realize like, all I need to do is, thanks to the filibuster and other things, is to prevent you from delivering anything. And then I win. So you sort of have to sort of reinvent how to succeed and to actually realize you can't be, the old rules don't work when, you have MAGA like shooting people in the streets and so forth. I would, it's bizarre to me because it just seems like all of our elected Democrats, particularly, forgive me, white elected Democrats, tend to be Bulwark Democrats. And by that being, they have a view of the Republican Party that is particularly biased because they will always say, I grew up in a Republican household or I have a Republican dad. I mean, I tend to think that the simplest explanation for what's happened with John Fetterman is that he has Republican it is very hard to essentially be in defiance of your family, right? Like, and if your family is like seeing you on Fox News, if your family is like, Reagan was a great guy, and that's what you've been, processing. So Mallory McMorrow is like, this is not your parents' GOP, even though it is. And also, it's a very old statement because, again, Reagan was 40 years ago. So someone who's even in their mid-30s, they're talking about your parents' GOP. They're talking about Gingrich, who was terrible. So there's this where part of reinventing the party in a weird way to me would be like, well, I know we were getting our ass kicked a lot, but what defined me as a Democrat was that we lost a lot, but like still standing for something. So having parents who voted for Mondale and thinking Mondale was going to win, because everyone I knew was voting for, all my parents in South Carolina was voting for Mondale, and like, oh, Reagan's in trouble. And then like, no, he lost. And vote, being behind Jesse Jackson at 84, at 88. And like, I would just love to see more Democrats on a national level who have that sort of background. I don't see it a lot. Like, what's your thought, Evan? Do you where are they?
So it's easy for us and for the people who we're critiquing to look at Republican politicians and condemn them for not pushing back on Trump, for not holding Trump accountable, but how often do we apply that same level of scrutiny to Democrats who won't push back on the corrupt power structure, the authoritarian wing of their own party? I'll offer a couple things. You said, Stephen, earlier you spoke about hearing the voices of regular people, of trans and queer people who aren't necessarily millionaires, of people who may be less educated. One of the things that was so, I think, important of the Fighting Oligarchy tour is if you look at the individual stops, before the big musicians, before Bernie, before AOC, you get all these, not labor leaders, but just members of a union coming up to talk. You get all these regular people, all these folks who maybe it's their first time public speaking, or it's their first time speaking for a crowd larger than those that could fit in a union hall. And there's this elevation of regular voices. I think there's a lot of reasons why the status quo establishment wing of the Democratic Party is terrified of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. But one of the reasons why they are, and they should be, is that AOC is the product of the Bernie campaign. And there's people all over our political environment who are now in positions of power and influence because of their experience becoming activated, mobilized, trained, hired, seasoned by those Bernie campaigns. And an AOC campaign will do the same thing. And then you get this force multiplier effect of people that can actually become staffers and then candidates and then reshape the party over time. This week, there was an arson attack in the state of California. Somebody filmed themselves burning down an entire massive warehouse of toilet paper. So set aside the sort of poetic resonance of COVID and toilet paper and all of that. They said quite plainly in their video before committing this crime that all they had to do was pay them better. This was a worker, an aggrieved worker from the company who had been fucked over, and they were taking that vengeance out on this massive stock and making a statement. We saw Luigi Mangione make a statement in a much more horrific, much more higher stakes crime. One life is worth all the toilet paper in the history of the universe. So that was a horrible crime, but that was a statement of grievance. And we saw Aaron Bushnell sacrifice his own life in an extraordinary death. That was an expression of grievance. And listen, I'm not for suicide. I'm not for murder, and I'm not for arson. I don't want to see any of these things. But I also think we have to acknowledge the reality that these profound statements of grievance and anger and anguish that do get a lot of attention, that are political crimes, so unfortunately, to a certain extent, these are the only things that seem to jar and shake the political class and the elite power structure that refuses to change. What we have seen under Trump over the last year plus is, I think, so much more terrifying and authoritarian and dangerous than almost anybody could have imagined, especially with this extraordinary war in Iran and Lebanon. And that is the direct result of democratic failure. And that the people who said we should run this terrible campaign, knowing that the stakes, if we lost, were so great, have seen the outcome of that be actually so much worse than our wildest nightmares, that they're still pushing the Democrats to run this same failed strategy.
Mm-hmm.
love America. They don't actually care about democracy. They certainly don't care about human rights, because if they're willing to run that risk, and they've now seen the outcome of what pays when a gamble doesn't pay off, and they still want to place that bet, I don't think these people have any love or respect or appreciation for the best principles that this nation was founded upon, what it could be, human rights or democracy.
Well, the people at risk, again, 2 Americans shot dead. Who knows if there are more, under Mark Wayne Mullen, who we should have no reason to trust any more than Kristi Noem. The damage done to trans people, down the line of what this administration has been doing, the warfare. And again, if I were in a different country and watching this, to see the opposing party, essentially their only solution is, please give Hakeem Jeffries a raise or promotion. That's the solution, is for him to get a better office, is horrifying to me. And there were reading of like, well, we don't want to try to impeach Trump. We don't want to make it about Trump. We're not going to try to impeach people because we want to make the focus about his corruption and about the chaos for the economy and whatever. So it seems to me you're not going to do anything. You're just going to keep the asteroid coming, because that's to your best interest, to get seats, to gain power, not do anything with the power. But Maxine Waters can be 90 years old and chair a committee. That's good. And then you're going to win in 2028. And, unless the party fundamentally changes, it'll be the same thing as Clyburn was saying in 2021, which was, let's not hold anybody. Let's not do anything, because we only have 100 days to pass a bipartisan bridge bill. And, we have to have, there are things I disagree with Ocasio-Cortez about, but I think she would be willing, and this is what I want to see from any candidate, she'd be willing to be like, in a normal world, here's my wish list. In this world, we need to dismantle MAGA for the sake of the free world. We need to make sure that this is not, because if I do business as usual, we saw it with Trump, with the MAGA cult. It'll be in the wilderness, J.D. Vance, or God help you, Tucker Carlson or whatever, whipping at dissent and taking the House again and taking the presidency. Like, that'll be the pattern. And you just can't repeat that pattern. You've got to say, no, for the next 4 years, as long as we have power, we need to make sure these guys are marginalized. And that's just very hard for them to do. And so it seems like I often sound like I'm criticizing Democrats a lot, but it's like, I can't fight the fire with, firefighters who are using gasoline or something. I've got to deal with them first, and then we can fight the fire.
Yeah, completely. And I think one of the big themes in this entire conversation that we've all been touching on, even if slightly, is the idea of big money in politics. And politics is kind of becoming this heavily monetized industry, which is not new to American history or to history in general, but in the way it happens in our modern society is relatively new. And I think that we really need to also advocate for changing the infrastructure around our corporations, people, how much we can donate to different political candidates, how much donor-based incentives are really at the foundation of the quote-unquote free research that's being done, or the ability to have free expression and free inquiry. And when we don't really talk about the influence that money has had in our politics, and also in an environment that the pie continues to shrink, but the pieces of the pie continue to get bigger for well-financed and well-moneyed interest, their ability to influence the political landscape, to not only influence the Republican Party, which everyone knows is heavily influenced by big industries, but also influence the Democratic Party, that all has to come into questions. Do we question the preeminence of Citizens United? Do we question the ability of corporations, again, to to involve themselves in politics at the same level that a human being is involving themselves. These are all factors that we would need in a new civic imagination that would be forming around a candidate who is not as tethered or burdened by the old way of doing things or the old political consensus. We would need them to speak on those issues and to speak on the kinds of reforms that are needed in order to be able to free our politics from the interests of big finance and big ag or big censorship, or whatever you want to name that day. And we have seen this throughout American history before. In the Gilded Age, we had two parties who were very comfortable in what they represented. We had the Republican Party that was very comfortable being the party of industrialism and of the robber barons, and we had the Democratic Party that was okay with being a segregationist backwater. And everyone played a role in our national political system. It didn't take until the progressive movement and the rise of the Progressive Party for the party system to start incorporating what the third party projects, whether it was from Free Silver all the way to the Bull Moose, were trying to incorporate in American politics for then the Democratic Party to transform into the party that gave us the New Deal. As imperfect as it was still a step towards being a country with a modern social safety net. Or in the reverse, the Republican Party's complete transformation into a staunchly pro-business and then eventually using reactionary forces from social change to push pro-business policy. And so we've seen this happen in American history before, and now we're living in a similar duopoly where we have a second Gilded Age, we have a new generation of robber barons, and we are having a large consensus of Americans all saying the same thing, essentially, just based on their own different viewpoints, lenses, or lived experiences about how unfair the landscape and the economy is for just the average working person. And are we going to learn from history, or are we just going to repeat it until we find ourselves in another mass calamity?
Well, and that's why I'm so energized by these people torching their own credibility, and that we're having this fight and that it's being litigated now. It's so fun, actually. It's entertaining to watch Cory Booker squirm because, right? Because he is on the hook, on big money, on corporate influence, and people know that. And the people that he has to interact with actually know to push him on that and know to interrogate him on that. And he tries to worm and say, well, it's just, fraction, and I have to listen to everybody. And it's like, bro, nobody's buying it. No. Nobody is buying it. And people used to buy it. And so part of what, again, I want us to have a little bit of optimism to recognize that, like, regular people aren't buying this. And what Cory Booker is selling, nobody's buying. What Gavin Newsom is selling, like, nobody's buying. Yeah. It's not just the inauthenticity. It's like, is that argument believable? And the fact is, like, it's just not. And it's so refreshing to me to see not just political nerds like us, but regular people who don't necessarily have that history, Stu, and don't necessarily have all the background. They don't know, Ornstein and Mann, and it's worse than it looks, and Gingrich and C-SPAN. They don't know all that, but they have fucking common sense, and they've become inoculated to a lot of this wormy, all this bullshit, and it's not landing. And it's really actually very valuable, and it's really actually very important that this cleansing debate, discussion, exposure is happening now, so that this common sense can percolate and expand and become the new meta, can become the new kind of status quo presupposition around how Democratic voters think, how we talk to Democratic voters, and how politicians that want our vote and our support are going to engage with us. Because if we're going to dismantle Citizens United, like, the attack on AIPAC is an attack on Citizens United. And the people who say, well, if you have a problem with AIPAC, you're just anti-Semitic. It's like, that is the most anti-Semitic thing I've ever heard. You're just saying, right, that it's all about big money, and you're perpetuating that anti-Semitic trope. And the reason, right? So like, you don't even have to care about Israel to see that AIPAC is just a stand-in for Citizens United. I think obviously it's a very uphill climb to repeal Citizens United and to slowly dismantle all these things that have entrenched the influence of big money in our politics. But one step towards getting there is a new environment where somebody like Cory Booker, who's a pretty slick operator and pretty sophisticated, still can't peddle his bullshit in a way that people are willing to buy.
Oh, there's a somewhat cliche argument that a lot of this sort of how traditional politicians have acted led to Trump and how people embrace Trump. But I wonder, because in Maine, with how Democrats are kind of going after Graham Plattner and Blepler's background, and, I have my issues with obviously all of that and a lot of his stuff he said and done, but it winds up coming across as being, I think there are people who are seeing like the idea, and almost to a degree with Jay Jones and Virginia as well, which is just, we're human beings, we screw up, we do stupid stuff, what matters now? If you want a perfect person, which again is sort of a West Wing quote, if you want a perfect person, that person doesn't exist. That is like, or to the extent that someone is, do you want someone who was built in a factory, who's at the age of 17 said, I'm going to be president, so everything I do is going to be the fit to get that resume. I'm not going to go outside the line of it. Or do you want someone who has screwed up in life, done bad things or whatever? And we could debate whether Graham Plattner is that person or is justified to support. But what shocks me is that the party can only engage with him in like ways that have been proven to have failed, where it's like, well, he's not electable. Okay, well, you can't make electability argument if you're going to be losing in polls against him and against Collins, or like, I can't offer an affirmative message, or the fact of all I can do is run an ad with people saying, oh, how disappointed I am, and the stuff he's written, like a Trump ad, a Clinton ad from 2016 about Trump, which just doesn't work. So why can't you just, basically listen to what voters want and say, I can deliver that better than this person, regardless of their background, and not try to be that this person's disqualified with the litmus test. What are your guys' thoughts on that before we close out?
Yeah, my thought is that we should be in the business of educating people as political actors, or at least politicians should be, in that true leadership. And this is where I will sound like a little bit like Charlie Sykes, even though I disagree with him on almost everything. But, he does say, like, and who I respect too. Honestly, I've met Charlie in real life. I know him. He's a interesting guy outside of his political opinions. Politicians, leaders need to lead, not follow. And Democrats are in a position right now where when you do things like that to Graham Plattner or to Abdul Al-Sayed or even Jasmine Crockett, you are putting your faith in the fact that there is a median ignorance within the American population, and that you're just trying to play a game of indicators around that medium level of ignorance that you've decided the American people inhabit, rather than saying maybe the American people deserve something better, or maybe the American people deserve to have the opportunity for something better. And going back to what you're saying, I don't want that person who decided they wanted to be president at 17 and has rearranged their life to become president. I knew some of those people growing up, and they are not the kind of people that I enjoy, because there's an inauthenticity there. We want people who are able to grow and understand that life has some rough edges, some hard turns, but at the end of the day, it's about remembering the sun shines the next day, and we have to keep on moving and keep picking up and trying to be better the next day. And if Democrats continue to try to, what I see as either punch down at young people or punch left towards left-leaning groups, that is not opening themselves up to the possibility that maybe the country was center-left at one point, when we were expanding the social safety net and when we saw public goods in the public square as something to be cherished. And now the country is center right, going far right, and that the middle ground should be somewhere in the center left, in center right, not between the center right and the far right. But in order to take on that perspective means that you have to be open to actually having hard conversations with constituents, actually showing the receipts when it comes to quality of life indicators and how they're failing one group, and by then is going to come and fail you, if not today but tomorrow. You know, if we don't have leaders who are willing to take that on, then we have leaders who are basically saying that they don't think the American people are worth being educated or worth being told or given the opportunity to grow and to become something better than we are today.
Yeah, with Mamdani, right, you couldn't have crafted out of thin air a better opponent for him to run against. And I think we're also seeing that with Plattner, that Mills is so incapable and so decrepit. And even just the idea that she would run for only one term in the Senate is just sort of on its face, like that's not a good sell. So it's this sort of perfect storm, right? Where Justin Mamdani was brilliant, talented, committed, had a great team. Plattner is everywhere, right? He's running a fabulous ground game. He's putting himself out there. He's got a great team. He's doing all the right fundraising. He is, I think, leaning in a very strategic way to addressing his failures and his shortcomings and his mistakes in the past. So you have somebody who is, I think, a true political talent and running against somebody who's really weak. And so that makes for a very stark comparison. I make sense of what we're seeing in terms of right-wing and establishment Democrats attempt to disqualify him through the lens of the multi-cycle smear campaign against Ilhan Omar. I'm from Minneapolis. She was my representative. And in many respects, that's kind of a formative era for me in understanding politics and how politics works. And I was a little bit confused at first because I saw these people trying to run primary campaigns against. She's got a great organization. She's not going to lose the primary. She's not going to lose the general election. But what I came to realize is that all the people who were investing their resources to try and delegitimize or marginalize Ilhan Omar were investing in shaping the narrative. That even if she lost, if they could make an example out of her, such that other people that might name and shame AIPAC for what it did, that they might think twice about that would be effective. If they could build a case against her that could ultimately be used to justify removing her from her position in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, which it did, then that would be an effective toolkit to apply to other people, that you could threaten anybody who might challenge the bipartisan foreign policy orthodoxy, not just as it relates to Israel, but as it relates to our own hemisphere. So these people are doing all these things that were ineffective electorally, but were reasserting and resetting the narrative, the Overton window, right? The framework upon which we can even have these conversations. And that's why we would see these things. That's the old playbook. What I think is so interesting and exciting about this moment is that they may be doing these things to try and hurt Graham Plattner. At a certain point, these sophisticated operatives, donors, agents who've done this over decades have to appreciate that actually he's going to win. And so then the question becomes, are they doing this to try and shape the narrative? Are they doing this to try and send a signal to other candidates, right? Are they doing this to try and set the conditions upon which the general election is going to be fought so they can limit the promises he'll make? And I would argue that it's not working. This goes back to compromising their own credibility, sabotaging their own credibility. The smear campaign against Hassan Piker, it taints the credibility of the very people who perpetuate it. And so that's remarkable. It's refreshing. And they're doing it because it used to serve their larger narrative long-term purposes. And I think it's actually hurting them. And that's something to have, and I think, an optimistic takeaway.
Yeah, and I will close with this. When people love when they talk about punching left, and to me, it's like part of intent is you have healthy disagreement that is not punching. If you're punching, it's performative, hurting. But when people love to say, let's reproduce a Sister Soldier moment, every white moderate has written about reproducing Sister Soldier moment. I've written about this to put into context the same summer that happened. Where did Bill and Hillary prominently appear? Whose talk show? Arsenio Hall. And at the time, this is 1992, predominantly Black audience, predominantly left-leaning audience. This was not Letterman, which was hip and cool. This was not Carson of all things. It was Arsenio Hall. He played sax. There is a balance there that I think, if you're going to try to emulate, the triangulation, you need to consider that Clinton did those things as well. And I think often that's missing. Instead, you get Slotkin punching on young people, liberals, whatever, and then going on Bill Maher, which to me would be the equivalent of, Clinton doing that and going on, a conservative leaning show, as opposed to reaching out to other group, the show of like, this is done with even love, right? Like I'm criticizing within the family, and they're not necessarily doing that. And I think that needs to be sort of the key. Thank you so much, guys, for indulging me with this. We'll make it a two-part episode because this was a great conversation. And where can folks find you? Because your own stuff is great to read and watch as well.
Yes. Thank you, Stephen, for having us on. I'm a big fan of your Substack and your show. So this is a dream come true.
Thank you.
You can find me on stewonthis.com. And I'm also on Blue Sky at Steward Beckham. I'm Steward's Cat Horton on Twitter. I'm going to post more cat photos. And you can find me. Please don't try and find me on Facebook and Instagram. But if you do, I probably will still accept you as friend. So that's where you can find me.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This has been such a fun and generative conversation. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and with Stu. I publish Certain Thoughts Substack, so it's certainthoughts.substack.com, or you can just download the Substack app or go to substack.com and search up my name, Evan Stern, or Certain Thoughts. Thank you so much. And thank you, Stephen. What a cool conversation.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Like, share, subscribe, follow, and we'll catch you next time. Take care.
See you.